It's easy to overlook the evil that walks among us. It could be anyone, your neighbor, the person sitting next to you at the cafe, or the quiet couple down the street. In the quaint towns of France, where every face is familiar, people believed in the safety of their routines. They trusted the silence of their communities. But beneath this quiet facade, evil had taken root, hidden in plain sight. Michel Fourniret and Monique Olivier, names that, to their neighbors, were nothing more than a polite couple living an unremarkable life. They were the perfect cover for the darkest of human depravity. Together, they formed a deadly duo, weaving a nightmare through the fabric of their picturesque town, masking themselves in the shadows as they unleashed unspeakable horrors upon the innocent. The morning sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled light on the cobblestone streets. Birds sang sweetly in the trees, and the townspeople moved about their daily routines, completely unaware of the darkness that had taken root. Michel, with his calm demeanor and quiet nature, would stroll through the town square, greeting shopkeepers with a polite nod. His eyes, however, told a different story. There was a coldness in them, something unsettling. Monique, his wife, was always nearby. A woman of few words, she blended into the background, her presence almost ghostly. There was nothing remarkable about her, just another face in the crowd. But behind the curtain of normalcy, there was a horrifying secret. Together, they lived a life of shadows, a life where they could move unnoticed through the streets, plotting their next move. Their victims, like the townspeople, never saw them coming. No one knew how it started. Perhaps it was a conversation whispered in the dead of night. Perhaps it was a look shared across the dinner table. But somewhere along the way, Michel's desires became too twisted for him to hide. He had a hunger, a dark urge that he could no longer control. And Monique, broken by her own past, became more than just his wife. She became his accomplice. It all began with a pact. Michel, the predator, had a taste for young girls, an obsession he fed on in secret. Monique, once a victim herself, could have turned away, but instead, she joined him in his depravity. It was as if some dark force had bound them together. Their relationship wasn't built on love. It was built on blood. Michel needed someone who could lure the innocent into his clutches, and Monique played her role perfectly, like a spider weaving her web. Together they became unstoppable. They were partners in the darkest of crimes, feeding off each other's evil, growing bolder with every step. The townspeople continued their lives, blissfully ignorant of the horror lurking in their midst. The true nature of the couple remained buried beneath layers of deceit and darkness. Her name was Elise. She was only 16, with a whole life ahead of her. She was walking home from school one afternoon when she noticed the car. Monique was behind the wheel, smiling sweetly, offering her a ride. Elise hesitated, but Monique's motherly demeanor put her at ease. What harm could come from accepting a ride from someone so harmless? As soon as Elise shut the door behind her, she knew something was wrong. The air in the car felt heavy, oppressive. Michel was in the back seat, silent, his eyes watching her through the rearview mirror. The road twisted and turned, leading deeper into the woods, away from the safety of town. Elise's heart pounded in her chest as she glanced out the window, watching the trees blur by. They were heading into the unknown, and she could feel the walls closing in on her. The trees grew thicker, the light dimmer, and soon the car stopped in the middle of nowhere. Her cries echoed through the empty woods, piercing the stillness of the air, but no one heard. No one was coming. Michel and Monique had chosen their location carefully, far from prying eyes, far from help. Together, they silenced her forever. The woods became her tomb, and their trail of horror had only just begun. After release, there were more. Michel was not a hunter of animals, but of the innocent. His eyes gleamed with a predatory hunger as he stalked his prey, each new victim fueling his insatiable thirst for control and death. But he wasn't alone. Monique, who had once been meek and broken, had become something else entirely, a predator in her own right. They perfected their methods. Monique would lure the victims, using her unassuming nature to disarm them. Michel would strike, quick and brutal. Their targets were always the weak, the vulnerable, the ones who couldn't fight back. Girls with wide, trusting eyes, boys with no one to notice when they disappeared. They used deceit, fear, and brutality to capture their prey, leaving nothing behind but echoes of terror. Each new life they took added to their growing list of victims. The fear they created was tangible, a dark cloud that hung over the town, though no one could pinpoint its source. Years passed, and the couple's evil remained hidden, a cold silence between their public faces and their private monstrosities. To the outside world, they were just Michel and Monique, a quiet couple who kept to themselves. They weren't social, but they weren't suspicious either. Their neighbors would see them out on walks, hand in hand, like any other couple. Michel, with his stoic face, always seemed distant, but never alarming. Monique, with her withdrawn nature, was simply seen as shy. Together they existed on the edge of society, just close enough to blend in, but far enough to avoid suspicion. Their modest home was a place of nightmares. The rooms were filled with the remnants of their crimes, trophies of the lives they had taken. But no one ever crossed the threshold of that house. No one ever heard the screams that had once echoed within those walls. Michel and Monique were masters of deception, keeping their horrors concealed behind locked doors and closed curtains. To the outside world, they were just another faceless couple, nothing more than shadows in the crowd. As the years wore on, Michel's thirst for control deepened. He had to have more. His desire for power over life and death consumed him. But with each kill, his grip on reality loosened. The line between predator and prey blurred, and Michel began to spiral. Monique watched as her husband unraveled. She too had changed. No longer the passive accomplice, she had become an active participant in the slaughter. The darkness that had once frightened her now filled her with a sense of purpose. Together, they were no longer just a couple. They were monsters. But even monsters can't hide forever. It started with a mistake. Michel, in his growing arrogance, became careless. He was no longer satisfied with the small victories, the quiet killings. He craved recognition, though he didn't realize it. His ego blinded him to the cracks forming in their perfect facade. One of their victims escaped. She was broken, battered, but alive. She told the authorities what had happened, describing a faceless couple who had taken her, who had tried to destroy her. Her story was dismissed at first, too fantastical, too horrifying. But the police couldn't ignore the growing number of disappearances. Soon, the puzzle pieces began to fall into place. Michael's name started to surface in connection with the missing girls, and once the authorities began to dig deeper, they realized they had a monster on their hands. The night Michel was captured, there was no dramatic chase, no final confrontation. He had grown sloppy, and his ego had become his downfall. The police moved swiftly, arresting him as he left his home one morning, his face cold and expressionless, as though he knew this moment was inevitable. Monique watched from the window as they took him away, her face a mask of calm. She knew they would come for her too, and they did. But she didn't fight. She didn't scream. She simply let them take her, just as she had taken so many others. The town, once so quiet and unassuming, erupted in shock and horror. The people who had lived next to Michel and Monique, who had greeted them on the streets, who had smiled and waved at them in passing, now realized they had been living alongside true evil. The truth was too much to bear. When the truth came to light, it shocked the nation. The faceless couple, Michel and Monique, had claimed the lives of so many, and their acts were as monstrous as they were methodical. Their victims were finally given voices, and the stories that emerged were more horrific than anyone could have imagined. The press dubbed them the Faceless Killers, a title that seemed fitting. To the outside world, they had always been faceless, blending into the background, unnoticed, unremarkable. But now, their true faces had been revealed, and the horrors they had committed could never be forgotten. Even after they were imprisoned, the specter of their crimes loomed large. The families of the victims, the towns they had terrorized, and the people who had once known them could never escape the shadow they had cast. Michel and Monique would spend the rest of their days behind bars, but the horrors they committed would never be locked away. The memories of their victims, their twisted legacy, would forever haunt the memories of those who knew the truth. Some monsters don't need masks to hide their evil. Sometimes, the most terrifying creatures are the ones who live among us, faceless in the crowd, unseen until it's too late.